was okay. And was a founding board member of the Council of Autism Service Providers, which is CAS. Sarah has presented at over 30 professional conferences throughout the United States. Sarah has provided consultative services for ABA providers in Belize, Kenya, and Brazil. That's amazing. Sarah currently works as the co-founder and producer at On Location, a media company. Sarah also provides consultation to ABA associations and businesses throughout the United States. Sarah loves to work out. You've seen those videos. I mean, we've all seen those videos. Drinks far too much coffee. She brought 3 cups with her today and loves to disseminate the power of behavior analysis. And now Sarah Litvak is a behavioral scientist who currently serves as CEO of Behavioral Health Center of Excellence, the only ABA-specific accrediting body. She has served as a consultant for numerous payers, state and governmental organizations designing quality assurance processes to ensure that ABA organizations provide clinically sound services, just a needed service. Sarah also regularly provides due diligence for healthcare investors with a special focus on technology, autism, and developmental disabilities. Sarah is a board certified behavior analyst who serves as adjunct professor for the Applied Behavior Analysis program at Pepperdine University. She is an education blogger for Huffington Post and has served as co-chair of the Autism Special Interest Group for ABAI and on the board of directors for the Association for Science and Treatment, or for Association for Science in Autism Treatment, and as a subject matter expert for the Behavior Analysis Certification Board, BACB. In her free time, Sarah enjoys anything tech, traveling, yoga, and spending time outdoors. Whew, what a roster these 2 women provide. So let's give a big welcome to these brilliant women joining us this morning. Yay. No one else can hear clapping, but I'm sure everyone is doing it at home. So welcome, welcome, welcome. All right. So what we're talking about today is we're looking at taking a perspective as a young BCBA, right? So I've been credentialed, we see the stats, right? It's 50% have been credentialed for 5 years or less. Mm-hmm. And with that, you're learning a lot that you didn't necessarily learn in grad school. You're learning a lot on the job, or there's skills that you need to learn on the job. So with that, when you graduate, or, maybe you were still in a job post-graduation, and maybe it's time for you to spread your wings and you're on the hunt for an agency for employment elsewhere. Mm-hmm. What are some critical features to look in, say, a center of excellence, if you will? What are some critical features of saying, like, this is the agency I want to look for? Or conversely, what are some red flags that suggest I need to run for the hills?
Mm-hmm. That is a great question. And since you plugged the Center of Excellence piece in there, I will take this one. I think the first thing I'll start by saying is when I give these suggestions, it's coming from a place of being a technician, being a supervisor, being a clinical director, and being a CEO of an agency. So I've kind of been in all those roles and have seen what quality could or couldn't look like at that level. And one of the things that has stood out to me in my career is that there are some organizations where you have different quality of care or different experience dependent on who your BCBA is supervising you, or dependent on who's kind of overseeing that region or that department, right? And so what I always was aware of as an early career professional, and I learned in graduate school, was this very famous quote that we've all heard of, which is, if you put a good person in a bad system, the system will always win. And if you put a bad person in a good system, the system will always win. So I think when we talk about an organization, that's really the system that you as an early career professional you're choosing to be a part of. And that's the system that's going to be shaping your behavior and going to be really forming you as to what behaviors you're learning and what behaviors are really incentivized and promoted. So when we talk about a center of excellence, from my perspective, it really is, what is that system and how does that organization make sure that they are never putting you in a position where you're having to choose between your job and your ethics code, making sure the organization is transparent and committed to evidence-based practices, making sure that there's clear lines of communication throughout the organization, and that each tier has clear values and clear roles and responsibilities. You shouldn't feel like you're really like floating through the wind. So a lot of those areas that I'm talking about come down to the organization's willingness to focus on quality improvement and continuously improve. Yesterday, I was talking with a group of clinicians, and we were talking about this idea of getting 1% better every single day. And that's something that's really important that you do as early career professionals, is how can you little by little start improving yourself, but how can you make sure you're in an organization that's doing that as well? So through BHCOE's accreditation process, we really try to be partners with organizations and make sure that they are continuously improving and that they are working through that. Accreditation doesn't mean the organization is perfect, but if you are looking for a position, an organization who holds accreditation will indicate that they at least have some type of continuous improvement process in place so that you are joining a system that's incentivizing the right behaviors.
Yeah, can I add on a little bit to that, Sarah? I totally agree with everything you're saying. I think that likely what happens with a lot of young professionals is the information that you're talking about in terms of kind of the broad organizational structure. I think it might be challenging for young professionals to know, like, how do I even begin to evaluate the system? And so what I'd like to propose is something that's a little more narrow that could help, kind of focus people's decision making. And I believe that we added this into either the handouts or I don't know, Carrie, how you guys are dealing with all of the supporting documentation that we created for this session. But one of the things that we're adding in was an article that was authored. The first author is David Cox, who is someone that I've known for a long time. He worked at STE, and his career is something that I have followed continuously. And it's a great, I think, very easy to understand, kind of helpful guide for practitioners that are considering taking a job with an ABA organization, and questions that they might ask them, and indicators that that organization is operating in an ethical manner. And a lot of the questions really kind of focus around what the practitioner is going to be doing within that job, the type of mentorship, supervision they might have, the type of programs that the agency is running. And while I don't know that the article was necessarily written in terms of being aligned with BHCOE, I think that because the focus is, ethical organization and quality, I think, Sarah, there's going to be I already know that there's like kind of a natural alignment with this article and some of the things that you guys are doing. But I think that is a practical tool that young practitioners can use. And again, it's a very easily digestible article. It gives like specific questions that you can ask, and it even kind of talks about how do you ask some of these difficult questions without sounding like kind of a jerk or a know-it-all, or that you're trying, basically, like, how do you do this in an interpersonal way that this potential employer is going to want to engage in answering these questions with you. And I have found that article to be, I think, just a wonderful resource. And again, something that we've attached to this talk, because I think it's a nice way for someone to approach, like, okay, oh my gosh, there's no way I'm going to be able to know like all of the systems and the nuance of what's going on in this organization in this interview, but I can really kind of narrow what I'm asking and what I'm looking at for myself, and using these questions as a guideline will really help me kind of see, do we have values alignment here?
Right. And I'll make sure that article is posted in the article section on Whova.
Okay. And I was going to add that I think there's some proactive strategies you can take, like questions in the interview, like Sarah mentioned. And I think there's some that you can have, as you asked about red flags, Carrie. So I think you really want to be looking for those during onboarding. But when you're interviewing, you want to ask, like, how do I know whether I'm doing a good job here? How do you monitor your employee performance? Like, how do you measure employee satisfaction? How do I know if I'm being successful? Do you have a quality assurance officer? I think that's a really great question to ask in an interview to make sure that there's someone there who's measuring that. And then I think, like, when you're onboarding, that's where you want your spidey senses to be on, right? Like, you've kind of taken faith that you found the right organization. But some of the things that you want to think about is whether you are ever interviewed by a clinical staff member before you're hired. So I think that's something that can be really important is if you're onboarded by someone who's an administrative assistant who hasn't asked you any clinical questions, I think that's something to definitely be aware of. You want to make sure you're not going with an organization who hires everyone they interview. I know some organizations use that as a weed out criteria. So they hire everyone and they use training to weed people out. And that's something you definitely want to be aware of. And then sometimes you have organizations who say they need someone yesterday and they hire you and put you right in the home. And so that should certainly be a red flag for you, is that you don't really want to be providing services before receiving any training or having any services that have been checked to make sure that you kind of know what you're doing. So I would say keep an eye out for that, just as some early red flags.
Mhm.
Those are excellent points. And, one thing to add is that, make sure you go in with those lists of values that as a clinician you hold near and dear, if it's as a place of employment, but it's also as a, quality of service that you find important. Is this agency delivering the type of treatment that you find valuable? Because then if not, that's going to be a little bit of a tough time for you to navigate through when you're delivering services. And that it's not just about the sticker price, right? Because everyone can get a little bit sidetracked, be like, oh, wow, but God, that salary is really enticing. But if it is not in alignment with your values as an employee or as a clinician, then sometimes that really big salary is just not going to be worth it.
Yeah.
I would also, sorry. I was just going to say, I would also add, it's something that I've heard a lot from young practitioners, is being asked to take on a job where you are, you do not have the scope of competency to be able to do the job that the association or organization is asking you to do. And I also believe in the article handouts, there's some really great, Matt Broadhead is like the king of scope of competency conversations. And he's written some great articles just talking about, hey, your behavior analyst certification is awesome. And we're so excited that you're in the field. It is a minimum standard. And that does not mean that you can do everything. Your BCBA is also not specific to autism or any population. And so really looking at, if you are interested in taking a job and you do not have, within your scope of competency, the types of skills that are needed to do that job, and the potential employer's like, don't worry about it, we'll just figure it out eventually. Those are kind of like, those huge red flags that you need to be attending to. And again, you want to be really looking for an organization that is going to be able to provide you with additional mentorship, ongoing training, supervision, and tons of learning opportunities, so you can continue to extend your expertise and expand your scope of competency as you're kind of coming out with this, again, awesome certification, but a minimum competency.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think we covered a lot just now in terms of like training and onboarding, kind of the clinical piece, right? Kind of the supervision and oversight piece. And then the last piece that I think is really important is your actual workplace. I think that, you really want to be aware of a workplace where gossip is rampant, right? If that's something that you're seeing, that's probably not a good thing. And that, that definitely trickles into your ability to provide quality care. It trickles into your ability to feel safe talking to your supervisors. I know one red flag I always talk to my students about at Pepperdine is if you hear your supervisors speaking negatively about others within the organization, that's something that is not modeling good behavior. And I would certainly be aware that that's not something that you want to imitate. And I think we're learning a lot from our supervisors. We're really sponges. And so sometimes those types of behaviors are things that unfortunately get handed down through generations of clinicians, right? That we don't want to continue to hand down. I also think there's just some basic things like you haven't seen your supervisor within 30 days of hire, or maybe you have multiple staffing changes within 30 days. If you're a BCBA, if you have multiple RBTs that are kind of changed out from under you within 30 days, or if you're an RBT and you have no supervisor or multiple supervisors, that can be something to be aware of, that you could probably bring to your clinical director and say, hey, I'm concerned, what's going on here? And, let's say you go through this really great training and, again, you don't get any additional training within a year of your employment there. That's something to be aware of too. Like Sarah said, it's a base level competency, this certification. So you want to continuously be improving and learning.
Excellent, excellent. Well, this kind of transitions us to supervision. So the role of BCBAs, one of them is to supervise RBTs or those looking to become credentialed, right? And so we know that when we juggle various hats, like as humans, right? We can
You mean
be
like I was just doing right now with my kid coming to the side asking that they're good to see my son who's taking this exam right now, and he's like, I need your email address, and I'm like, I told you I was presenting. Welcome to 2020.
Welcome to 2020, right?
So 2020 of you, Sarah. So
yes. So yes, exactly.
All the hats.
But, yeah, all the hats as parent, right? As presenter, as expert, as employee. So we're flirting with high levels of stress and burnout. So how can BCBAs be mindful of such contingencies, knowing that they may not be in like supreme positions of authority in the organization, right? So they may not be able to like deliver all of the expectations or regulations around like what staff can do, but they're still functioning as supervisors of like really valuable staff members.
I have a short answer because I don't do a lot of supervision in my line of work, so I'll hand it to Sarah. But the first thing that I would just say is supervising is really, really hard, and it's a really big responsibility, which is a lot of the times why I don't do it. But I would say that it's okay to say no. I think one of the biggest things I've had to learn in my career is to say that you don't have the bandwidth for something, or you don't think you can do it to the extent that you would want to do it, or you might not meet the quality piece that you want, right? And I think we all hold ourselves to high standards. And so I think when it comes to supervision, knowing your capability is really important, and making sure that you are aware that you're shaping someone's career and you're shaping someone's learning. And so you really want to take that seriously and dedicate the time that's needed to make sure that person has a good experience. And if you can't, then that's okay to say, I don't have the bandwidth to take on supervisees or to really, to work in this role.
And that again really speaks to the scope of competency issue, right? I mean, if it takes, I would say from my experience, years to develop great competencies in supervision, whether that is supervising potential BCBAs, whether that is supervising direct care staff. I mean, these are skills that are generally, not necessarily discreetly taught in graduate programs, or maybe taught, but you're going to have a limited amount of time that you're spending on that because you're mostly going to be focusing on the technical application of behavior analysis and really understanding the fundamentals of our science. And so a term that's often used for these types of skills there's a soft skill component in terms of like, how do you talk to other people? How do you provide them with feedback, interpersonal relationships? But there is another term called kind of that last mile training that's looking at that last mile between, the skills that you might have obtained in your graduate program and even potentially in an externship or internship, and then the skills that you really need to have competency in the job that you're doing when you are seeking employment after you have become certified. And again, I think this is where it's really important to try to set yourself up for success. And similarly to what, Sarah and Carrie and I have already talked about in terms of identifying a really great place for you to work. A really great place that's going to work for you if you're an early career BCBA is going to be a place that's going to provide you with supervision for you. And that's also going to provide you with additional training to help you be a great supervisor for others. And a great organization is going to understand that those are skill sets that take a while to develop. And a great organization is also going to understand that there's a lot of competing contingencies on your time. And depending on the type of service delivery that you're engaged in, especially if you're working in a behavioral health setting, you likely have billable hour requirements, and they're going to be sensitive and understand how you need to be able to allot time for those billable hours. If you're having to commute to different clients' homes, if you have to supervise multiple people in a center, good organizations have taken that into account when they're looking at how you are allocating your time. good organizations are helping you to really understand the best way to time manage. And really good organizations are not asking you to do so many things that you do a little bit of everything kind of crappy versus focus on doing a couple things really, really well.
I completely agree.
I was going to add to that. I think Sarah and I probably, and Carrie, you two probably remember this. I think that kind of old school teaching methods were very heavily based on negative reinforcement. There was a lot of, sometimes it wasn't pleasant getting feedback from supervisors. And I think, we were all kind of raised in this environment where, you just suck it up and take it. And I do think the field is shifting to a place where no matter what someone's teaching you, you will remember how they made you feel. And I think that's something that's really important is when interacting with supervisees and vice versa, is making sure that they walk away feeling empowered and feeling good about what they can accomplish with the feedback you've given them, and making sure that intent is always there, that the intent of feedback is to help them grow and be better, so that they can be successful in their career, as opposed to probably what we grew up in, which is, you guys are, failures until you fix this, right?
And we like cry in the bathroom by ourselves and then just try to figure out a pathway forward.
I know that, like, I talked to so many colleagues who are kind of in the same generation as us, and that was kind of how we were raised, is like a lot of berating and a lot of just like being put down. And I think many of us in this new generation of BCBAs are really trying to shift that approach and make sure that people walk away feeling good about themselves and know that they have superpower and they can accomplish a lot with the right feedback and support.
For sure. And it's more of a nurturing model, right? It's like the mentorship that takes a nurturing perspective as opposed to work so hard to avoid the punisher, right?
Well, I think also, fundamentally, it's what it is a behavior analytic model. What we're looking at is taking a circumstantial view of behavior. And we do a fantastic job of applying this in the populations that we work with. We do an absolutely crap job of applying this within the people in our own organizations. I would say for the most part, when I see people in our field that are making mistakes, it's not purposeful. They're not trying to do it because they are bad or they don't care. It's often because there is a skill deficit, there's a motivational deficit, and there is some great tools within our field to really help identify and address those. And I think by having, approaching issues, especially, when someone has exhibiting poor performance and approaching it from a behavior analytic way, really doing a functional assessment to figure out, what is the function of this behavior, and then being able to implement a treatment plan that will effectively help address that, everybody wins. And I think something that you said, Sarah, earlier really stuck with me. The whole idea is like, don't ever underscore the importance of how you treat other people, because there's this cascading effect in organizations. And if you're a supervisor, how you interact with others, the language that you use, the way that you approach dealing with problems, that is the green light for other people to do exactly the same.
Yeah.
And so it's like Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, but that can also be awesome. So I think, I do think that we are really moving towards, again, looking at how we engage with our colleagues, and again, really provide that supervision and mentorship from that circumstantial view. And if we can do that, it brings people into us, versus that kind of shaming and blaming, which, might be effective in the short term, but ultimately, honestly, doesn't, build relationships, and it doesn't make people want to come back to you to ask for questions and support and to really kind of continue to do better.
And it trickles to our clients too. Like, it's not even a trickling effect within an organization, but it's a trickling effect to the level of our clients. So if we're not even giving that appreciation to our staff, then are we even modeling that type of behavior that we want to see, of that nurturing effect to our clients?
Yeah, I was going to add to that. I think I forgot what I was going to say. I was just saying something along the lines of, like, if staff satisfaction surveys were conducted like 20 years ago, I think it would have been hilarious to see what people said. I'd probably be too terrified to actually like write what I felt. But I think luckily we're in this position where we can really, that's what I was going to say. So my suggestion was, if you're listening to this and saying, I'm in one of those negative relationships with my supervisor, or I, feel negative in the workplace, my suggestion though is don't run for the hills, right? Like, this is an impetus for you to have the conversations and be part of the change and work in the system and bring that feedback in a way that's not confrontational, that's not combative, but coming from a place of, I like working here. I love the patients we serve. this is what I need to be successful here, and this is what I'm looking for from you. I think we have a lot of turnover in the field. And I really strongly believe that one of the reasons is that whenever we find this negative situation, we just go, well, I don't want to be here anymore. And we need to be part of the change, and we need to work within the system we're in. Now, there's some things that can't be changed, right? If there's anything like just largely unethical or fraudulent or illegal, of course you don't want to be there. But if it's something along the lines of like, my supervisor's too hard on me, that's on you to clearly outline your expectations to them about what you need to be successful in that role. And as a supervisor, I know feedback is the best thing my team can give me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that leads us into like having difficult conversations, which is like a skill that isn't necessarily taught in grad school, because grad school is another environment that is highly punishing. So, right, the world of academia is not necessarily a nurturing model, but that's another conversation for another time. So, in how would you guys advise, handling conversations with, your supervisor or your, RBTs that you are supervising, or even colleagues, such like that's going to pop up. So how do you navigate those uncertain waters?
Personally, the way that I like to interact with difficult conversations is to first start by sharing your intentions. I think that's really important, whether it's my intention here is that I love that you work for me. I love you're such a big part of this team. I really love that you're part of this team, but these are some areas that I'm struggling with. My intent of sharing this feedback with you is, to help you improve so that we can continue working together, right? So always sharing the positive intentions of why you're sharing that information. I think the second piece too is point-to-point correspondence, right? So we did this a lot, like, I see this, do you also see this? So instead of sharing like, this is what's going on, I think it's saying like, this is what's going on from my perspective. What's your perspective about what's going on? And assuming that those might not align, and knowing that your perspective might need to be adjusted to get alignment with that person, right? So you can't go into it saying, this is my perspective and this is just how it is. You need to go into it saying, well, maybe theirs is different, and let's find a medium ground of like really resolving what actually happened and where we need to go from here. So I personally believe that framework can work upwards and downwards. So I don't think that you need to do it differently based on whether you're a supervisor or a supervisee. I really think that this needs to be a two-way conversation. And a lot of my students in Pepperdine, I know this, I always joke, just because someone's a rabbi, a priest, a doctor, or a position of power does not mean that they are all knowing and all benevolent, right? We know this, right? With priests, like obviously, like that's a big topic that comes up, but like just because someone is senior to you does not make them right. And I think you need to have that critical ability to question anyone, independent of what position they're in, and have the confidence that yes, in an org chart, you might be entry level or even mid-level, but you still are human, and they're human at the end of the day. And that's like, the equalizer at the end of the day.
And I think it's also important to really have challenging conversations by starting with like, what's the point of this? Like, where do I want this to end? And generally speaking, the point is, I want to understand you better. I want you to understand me better. I want to understand the situation better. But most of the time, challenging conversations are about resolving conflict to be able to like move forward in a positive direction of some sort. And I also think that that's important for people to hear, is like, hey, gosh, we might have to talk about some hard stuff, but ultimately the goal of this conversation is to get here and to get there together. And I think if you can frame it in that way, it's a lot easier for people to engage in those conversations. And I also think, Sarah, what you're saying is really important. Instead of saying like, you did this, you, saying like, I was feeling this was my perspective, and also allowing the space for someone to be able to have their perspective, because you may or may not have considered it. I will also say, and Ellie Kazemi does a great job of this. She does she's done some really great research in the conflict management space.
Yeah, why do you love my team so much?
Why do you like it? Yeah, I'm like David Cox, Ellie Kazemi, all of my names. But something that's really important is And we know this in terms of when we're teaching skills, especially if we're engaging in behavior skills training, you're not just going to magically develop a competency in having challenging conversations like the first time you have it. You need to have practice. And what we did at my former organization is we brought Ellie in and we did multiple trainings on conflict management strategies. And part of what Ellie did was make people role play and talk about things and get uncomfortable, because you have to be willing to kind of go there to start building that muscle, to start understanding how to do it. And so I think that that's a really big training piece that organizations may or may not attend to, because, you know, you're like, gosh, well, I really want you to be a great clinician, or I really want you to make your billable hours. But there's been numerous surveys that have been done in our space. And one of the largest barriers for people in terms of like job satisfaction and feeling like they're doing great work is their lack of comfort in dealing with conflict. And so these are, I mean, this types of training pays massive dividends, because literally you can apply it to anything in your life.
I would also say that one thing I like to do, like, so if someone comes to me with like a small qualm about someone else in the team, I like to tell them to talk to that person about it. And as a supervisor, it's really easy for me to say, oh, that sucks, sorry that happened, and then just go, you know, move on. But I think you're giving them an opportunity to practice that skill set on a really small behavior that is probably not a big deal, and probably not a big deal to anyone, or they might think, well, I don't really need to bring it up, it's not worth it. But that's a practice attempt that you can use. So I would encourage you as a BCBA to do that with your technicians, and also do that amongst each other. If there's something minor that you're thinking, it's not worth bringing up, just bring it up, just to practice bringing it up, right? Because it's something that's super low stakes, that's not going to matter if it doesn't get resolved in the way you wanted it to.
Exactly. I think Ellie, I've attended some of her supervision workshops, and, you know, I think one of the role playing models was like, your RBT, when they bend over, their underwear shows often. Practice giving them feedback around that. Or, you know, they don't wear deodorant, and, you know, when it's hot out and their odor, you know, they have a lot of odor during that time. Practice giving them feedback about that, you know. And so we get in these dyads to role play. And so if you can start getting comfortable about some of those issues, then it helps you to actually have some big conversations that are around maybe your job and your performance, and a little bit harder conversations. And like when you are a BCBA supervising RBTs, because that is actually the code that you know, around the practice that you actually have to engage in, you're going to have to, you know, maybe have difficult conversations, or, you know, you're going to have to give feedback where maybe you're not used to doing that, engaging in that behavior, and saying like, yeah, don't run the program that way. You know, that even at that level may be difficult for some people. I've witnessed that, you know. So having, you know, practicing engaging in those things like you all mentioned, outside of the context itself, helps strengthens those muscles.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
I love that we've gotten through like literally like 2 of our like 87 points. Already like 35 minutes in. We are killing this.
Oh, seriously. You know, when I was in the when I worked at an agency and I was interviewing a lot of, you know, fresh BCBAs, they often asked for positions that seemed to be a little bit more advanced than ones that they were ready for. Ones that were maybe a clinical director, or maybe some like systems analyst, like an OBM position or something like that, when maybe they had 3 years of experience. And in your experience, in your all's experience, what are some expectations clinicians should have with career advancement? I imagine this, obviously there's some variance given the agency size and opportunity, but what are some ways that they can strive to achieve these goals? We don't want to be like, that's not going to happen for you, but what are some positions that we can like place them in to achieve some of these goals?
Well, I think I'll start by saying that I completely get it. I was one of those clinicians, and I'll say that I was placed in a clinical director role before I was ready, and I had a really hard experience in that position. I was overseeing 400 patients, and I had been certified for 1 year. And it was a really, really challenging experience for me, but I learned a lot. But what I'll share is that there's something that I've learned in that, which is, yeah, saying like you're only one young once. It's like you're only new once at an organization. So you got to like soak it up. Like for the first 3 months, you can say, I'm new, explain this to me, right? Like, and I always tell new hires to like revel in that like you have like 3 months to basically like ask like any dumb question you can think of, because you have the excuse that you're new, right? And not to say you can't ask that question after, but like really soak it up. Like you can make all the mistakes you want, right? And so I think that's the same thing with being like in this new career professional phase. Is like the first 3 years your BCBA is really like this magical time where you can be like, I'm, help me, I'm poor. Like I'm new, I don't know anything, right? Not that you don't know anything, but you can say you don't know anything, and people are going to go out of their way to help you. So I really like to tell people to like revel in that and don't rush growing up, right? Like don't rush it, right? So I think that's number one. Number two is that I think there are some like intermediary roles that, like for organizations that are accredited, we really recommend that they have floating roles like quality assurance officers or ethics officers that are floating roles that like a BCBA can be doing for 6 months, and it gets transferred through those team members. And it gives you some experience in managing systems and processes and kind of larger scale decisions. And I really recommend reaching out to your organization and seeing if they have something like that. You can also be part of like tasks and committees within your organization. Hopefully, if there's like a central reach transition, right? People are adding central reach to their platform. There's a committee for that, and you want to put yourself in positions to help with things outside of just your caseload, and that will help prime you for that. So that when you go and say, I want to do more, you have a history of doing it. I think there's this misconception that you're just like, I've been a BCBA, therefore I am owed to kind of move to this next role. And I think you need to earn it before you get put in that role. And those are some of the ways that you can do that.
And I think this really comes down to, do you guys hear a weird echo?
I hear that echo.
That's so, no, in a way. Okay.
Okay.
I was saying that ultimately this really comes down to kind of your values as a professional. Because, right now in the behavior analysis, we're still kind of in the wild, wild west. Hey, if you're, got certified yesterday and you want to find an organization that's going to hire you and give you a clinical director job title and have you supervise 100 people, guess what? You'll find somebody. That'll likely happen. Is that going to be setting you up for success? Is it going to be setting up, especially the recipients of your service, for success? Likely no. And so this is where I think that you really have to do some work in terms of like, who do I want to be as a clinician? What are the things that are important to me? And from my experience, what I will say is clinicians that really understand that it takes time to develop some of the skill sets that we're talking about, that really understand the value of working with other people, and especially people that are coming from experience in other disciplines, or perhaps just have been, doing this type of work longer, that there is so much value in that. And being able to have an organization that's like, hey, we're stoked that you're here. And this is, by the way, what I did at STE. I'm really excited that you got your certification. But let me just tell you how we work. And we're happy to have you come in as, kind of a new clinical director. There's going to be 6 months of additional training that we're going to require that you go through. And there's going to be competencies that you're going to have to pass in order for you to like kind of take that next step. But guess what? We tell you, you're going to feel amazing. You're going to be supported, and you're going to feel so good about the job that you're doing. And like, that's our culture. And so if you're down with that, come on aboard. If you're just like, hey, I want like X dollar amount and X title because I think that I am, worthy of that, like, then you're not for us. And like, that's okay. But again, I think a lot of this is going to come down to personal values. What do you want out of your career? And what is, how do you find organizations that are going to align with you and are going to be able to give you really kind of clear guidance and understanding of how can you make these, take these steps in your career. What do you need to do in order to take these steps, and really kind of like give you an outline and really, help you grow and really facilitate you expanding your skill repertoires.
For sure. And I think, like you mentioned, ABA is still a little bit the wild, wild west.
Mhm.
So there are opportunities for growth, So if you are saying like, I want OBM, and you find an agency, again, that aligns with your values, but doesn't have the overhead for a position that can utilize that OBM skill set, but has the values that says, hey, we recognize that this is a value of ours. We want that down the road, that's something that we can talk about. You can help us shape that and be a part of that, but also granted, other people of the company want to be a part of that, but you can help with us, help us
Yeah.
grow into that.
I,
Then, that's something that they can, and then take an active role in that, don't just sit back and then have the company be like, oh, here, we've carved this out for you. Like if that's what you want, then you need to be like, take the initiative and be like, okay, so I saw they did this here and I've attended these workshops, and or I see that, I'm going to ABAI and I'm going to attend all of these talks, or I see that they're doing, APBA has a full day's training on this. Would you be willing to, pay for me to go? Or, like, take the initiative if you wanted to play a major role in that development.
I
And
would
so
just
that way, then when the company is ready to take on that position or, carve that out, then you can have a more senior position, with that focus.
I would just add that, in interviewing BCBAs, I do hear folks who say, I just want to do OBM. And the one thing I will make sure to mention is just remember, like, from a clinical director position, you need to be cognizant of profit and loss in an organization. And I know we talk about like, you know, we're not in it for the money, and like, you need to be going for what's most clinically indicated and all that. And we need to keep those values there, but you also can't help your patients if you're not making a profit, right? And I think that's just the reality of running a business is the organization needs to sustain, and we can only serve more patients if we have a sustainable business. So when interviewing these BCBAs, I oftentimes say, when I recommend that they go look for these OBM positions, I make sure that you have at least 50 or 75% billable hours, and start with that 25%. And then eventually you can build the capacity to do more of that. But it's going to be really challenging right now, especially in smaller organizations, to have a role that's just 100% focused on OBM. And I would caution you, if you want to do that, if you're going into a smaller organization in a non-billable role, just be really careful, because when things get tough, that's kind of the last, that's the first
Right,
one to
you're a
go.
non-revenue generating position, and so you're
Yeah.
the first one on the chopping block. Yeah.
Exactly. Now then I feel like then that easily can transition to someone saying, well, then I'm going to hang up my own shingle. Then, this can easily then lead me to saying, okay, I don't want to be the clinical director of 400 people, because yes, I will flop. But if I do want to do some OBM and I want to, call the shots, then, I'm a BCBA now. I can run the show. Talking to women who have made that decision, but also the landscape has changed, and we all know kind of the path wasn't necessarily easily paved. What would you say to someone who says, like, yes, like, I want to go off on my own? What advice would you give them in doing so? And as well as, what concerns would you lay out just to make sure that they were fully prepared to do so?
Yeah, I mean, I'll obviously, I have an entrepreneurial spirit. I founded
Yeah.
my agency when I was, 27 years old, and had been certified for about a year, and then had been in the field since I was 20. So I've been in the field for 7 years. But to your earlier point, Carrie, it was a different time. There was
Right.
no health insurance mandates, and so
Yep.
largely ABA services were done in consultation with school districts. They were done through Department of Developmental Services, or like in California, like the regional centers. But it was a very, very different type of landscape. And what we've seen in our field as we have, subsequently had health insurance mandates passed in every state, is that we have used our credential as the basis for billing. And is there 29 states with licensure right now or 30? I'm trying to remember. I think it's 29 or 30. California isn't one of them.
31.
31. Okay.
31.
Nevada is one because you're on their licensure board. I didn't know that because we sat down and talked about it. So, I mean, there's not a lot of barriers to entry, right? So you're like, okay, I have my BCBA, so I can bill and supervise and, draw down healthcare dollars, both commercial and Medicaid. If I, reside and practice in a state that requires licensure, I can obtain my licensure, and the, most licenses are predicated on that certification. And you might have to take like a jurisprudence exam or something else, depending on the state that you reside in. But your BCBA certificate should be the clear pathway to licensure. So you're just like, then why not? Because like I qualify. And what I would say is this, yes, like from a legal perspective and a standpoint, according to the, laws in your state, you qualify, but, does that mean that you, again, have the competency and skill set to do that? And I think those are two different issues. So first and foremost, what I will tell anyone is if you have just become certified and you want to start your own business and you have been, literally certified like last week, again, applaud you for, being tenacious. Would advise you don't do that. You don't know what you don't know. I made horrifying mistakes, in the early years of my business, but that was in a different age before people, there was no social media. We were not drawing down healthcare dollars, and the, scope of what we had to do was very,
Healthcare fraud is a real thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would not have started my business
malpractice
in the same way now that I did in 2004, which is known as the dark ages of behavior analysis, because I'm like a dinosaur. And so I think, I think it's fine to say this is a goal that I'd like to have, spend a year or two at least working for some great organizations, get better mentorship, work on refining some of your clinical skills, work on better understanding the systems within which you need to operate. Because there was a very interesting article published, what was it, last month, Sarah, in Spectrum News, talking about like, hey, ABA, holy crap, congratulations, you've grown so fast. Like, what's up with your quality? And I think that is a valid question to ask. And I think a lot of people are asking that question right now in our field. And part of this is just simply because we have had such a fast growth trajectory compared to other allied professions. Our numbers are growing in like at an obscene rate. And so it just creates these interesting challenges for us. Which is part of the reason why licensure is so important, why accreditation is so important, why being involved in your state association is so important, really understanding what it actually means to be an independent practitioner in a field that takes care of very, very vulnerable people. So I never want people to feel punished, like you shouldn't want to do your own thing and that there's not space for you. But I just think if you really want to do it right, I think the most important thing is to acknowledge that, like, again, you do have legally the qualifications that are required, but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily setting yourself up for success. And most importantly, you want to make sure that you're setting up the recipients of your service for success, because those are the people that matter most. And I firmly believe that someone that has a new credential and very, very little experience understanding the systems within which they operate are going to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's funny, Sarah. I agree with everything you said. My approach is a little different in the sense that I still don't think folks should do it right away. But what I would say is, like, the biggest thing I would say to anyone who wants to do it is, I don't think people realize that if you are opening your own agency, you will not be providing you will not be a clinician in a couple of years, right? And I think the piece that I think I see a lot of is these people who are opening their clinics, and then you realize you need a tax attorney, you need an employment attorney, you need, right, all of these legal people helping you. You need policies, procedures, you need to understand HR. You need to understand HIPAA, privacy,
scheduling, quality assurance, everything. Yeah.
So it's all those things that people think is really romantic. Like, I will be the clinical director, founder, owner, CEO, but you very much realize the clinical director piece is the easiest thing to outsource to someone else. And so you tend to hand that off to whoever your BCBA is that ends up coming on as you build your team. So it really just pulls you away from the reason why you joined the field in the first place. So I would say that is probably something people don't realize. And then the second piece is that you know, you suddenly can't sleep at night. And I think there's just, I don't think a lot of people realize that essentially it's like having a baby, right? Like no matter what you do, you're always worried about the baby. You know, it's like, it's always in the back of your mind. I just found the chat, by the way. Someone just said, I wish you said that 3 years ago. But I put the Spectrum News article in there also. Anyway, so I think that's another thing too, is like, it's really easy to romanticize having your own business and having your own practice, but like, it's just a lot more intense than you would think. It's not just like, oh, I go to work and I'm the boss, and like, it's like way harder than just taking a paycheck home, right? So you never sleep, and it's just an endless love, right? So that's what I would say, is just think critically about like what you like about being in the field, what you're excited about, and then try and find, if you do it, I would highly recommend you find a business aligned partner. So find someone who understands operations, and go find someone you work well with that you could potentially join together with to do something like that if you want to keep the clinical side.
Yeah, because I will say for me, I mean, I haven't been providing active clinical services for 14 years because I mean, there was just no time. There was absolutely no time to do it with all the other responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. I have been so engaged in this that I have neglected to do the CEs. Our CEs have been names of single name artists who are Beyonce. That one's for you, Sarah. Prince and Common. We're wrapping up here towards the end. And I just want to just add to this conversation that also, you know, not only will you not be the clinical director, if you're trying to be the clinical director, you know, that's like your quality will go down, right? Because you are spending all this time on all of those business things that Sarah mentioned. But if you realize that your quality is going down and your clients are receiving poor services because, you know, that is, you know, you're not attending to that as you should. So then you have to then hire a clinical director or another BCBA just to provide really good quality care. But then that means you have to have the money to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So before you take on this endeavor, make sure you have a decent nest egg to do all of that stuff. We have some
Do we have questions from the audience?
Yes, I am going to pull them now. One question, when we've mentioned some of the resources, I'm going to make sure that we put them in the article section of Whova. But other than what we've mentioned today, what are some best resources and competencies you recommend for those very important soft skills?
Okay, best. I mean, that's a really broad question. So like looking at like what are the specific soft skills that we think that people need to consider obtaining as they kind of continue in their
Well,
career?
I mean, we mentioned difficult conversations. I know that there's a book that's out there that talks about difficult conversations.
It's called Difficult Conversations. Yeah, it's called
Difficult Conversations. Yeah. Exactly. There's that's out there.
There's Ellie Kazemi's done a webinar for our members that you can, I think it's actually free on our virtual academy that you can access, that I highly recommend. I think the other piece, if you've heard of Coursera or like Skillshare, there's a lot of like free learning opportunities, and there's actually like an intro to management one on Coursera that I think is really good that talks about soft skills. I'm going to try and quickly find it and link it in the chat, but there's a lot of free resources out there. Even something as simple as like Harvard Business Review has like really great articles. Like go to HBR.com and like just read those articles. I mean, there's so much about
Inc.
like,
has a bunch of them too. Inc. has a lot. Yeah.
So just like find like, you know, some people like read, you know, your ABA Journal articles every morning or whatever it might be. Like you just, if you want to go down that path, you need to shift gears a little bit and say, where can I gain that knowledge from?
And Shella, Tara Sellers, and Linda LeBlanc just published a new supervision book that seems to take on a more nurturing effect. So that's something to seek out as well. Another question is, how do you manage scope of competence with access to healthcare? How can young practitioners bridge the access to healthcare to a population that is vulnerable?
Sarah probably has thoughts on this. I'm just going to go back, just be real and say, like, look, we all got out of our comfort zone when it came to scope of competence when COVID hit, right? Like, so many people started providing telehealth without any training and oversight, right? So in these situations, there are times where you just kind of say, let's do it and learn on the way there. Like, and I think that's okay. And I do see some more like rigid behavior sometimes of like, well, I was not definitively trained in this, therefore I'm not going to do it. And I think that's not the solution. But the solution isn't also, I'm just going to jump in without knowing anything. It has to be a middle ground of, I'm going to start my preliminary learning. I'm going to test pilot, get feedback, get mentorship, and kind of go from there. So I would say, in terms of resources, I think your mentorship is really important. Is who can you talk to and say, hey, I have a patient who has this behavior and I've never worked with it before. How would you approach it? You're always going to be learning. And I think there's this idea of like, when you do competence, like when competence is misleading because it means that you're done at some point, right? It's the same idea of like cultural humility versus cultural competence. Like, you're never done, you're always learning. So I think it can be just this idea of like, you have to just resolve that, like, you're always going to be learning and you're never going to be 100% competent in what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think it's knowing that use the best of our literature, the best of our research, the best of your network. If you, again, are not belonging to state associations or national associations, mentorship groups, these are why these organizations are so critical, because they're there to help you fill in the gaps. None of us know everything. I know this comes as a shock, because like for me and Sarah, I'm sure you guys are like, you guys know everything. Oh my God, I know nothing. The older I get, the more I realize I don't know crap, right? Okay, like life is so complex. There's so many things that are always changing. I love learning because I know like 2% of what there is to know. And so I think, yeah, I mean, I agree with Sarah. The whole idea is, and sometimes I think in our field, they're like, well, if you don't have it in your scope of competence, you can never do it. But then how are you supposed to ever get a scope of competence if you can't train to do it? So I think looking at, where can I access supports? Again, am I working within an organization that's really going to help me develop these things? How can I make a plan? And then how can I, execute on that plan and evaluate the efficacy of that plan and whether or not I'm doing it? And I mean, Matt Broadhead even talks about this within a lot of his articles. He's not suggesting like some finite sequence, like, well, you need to do A, B, and C, and that means you're, have a scope of competency. It's much more nuanced depending on what you're doing, but, do the work, do the research, make a plan, and then systematically implement it, just like we would do with recipients of our service. Do it for yourself.
Wonderful. Well, that's all the time we have, ladies. Thank you so much. Wonderful conversation. Y'all are both brilliant and very generous of your time. Thanks again.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks for being our lovely moderator.
I know, this is fun. And mostly I just want to see you guys. Like, I miss you so much. So this is great.
Thank you all for attending. I just found the chat, but
I never found it. I wish
I would have seen it the entire time, but y'all are awesome. And thank you for all the great feedback in the chat.
Yes. Have a good one.
Thanks, you.